Greetings, communicators. This is your persuasive speech evaluation form. I'd like you to think of this speech as a culmination of all of your effort put forth up until this point within the class. Speaking to persuade is a greater challenge than speaking to inform, because not only do you need to have those basic skills, how to structure a speech, how to fully develop the introduction, how to include transitions, how to fully develop a conclusion, how to cite your sources, how to fully develop main ideas. Beyond that, your goal is to persuade your audience. You're making the decision whether or not you're going to make a proposition of fact. Is this true or false? Of value? Is this right or wrong? Or of policy? Would you like your audience to advocate for or against a policy? Remember, this speech needs to be about a contemporary crisis or problem at either the local, state, national, or global level. Keeping all of that in mind, as you look at this evaluation form, over to the right over here, we have suggestions. And it's important to look at these suggestions because these are the areas, these are the things that beginning speakers do that they need to work on. So whenever you get a message from me or you get feedback from me, I might say something along the lines of work on a more effective attention getter right here. And then I would say, look at techniques as described in your textbook and introductions and conclusions. Another one down here is cite your research sources. And if you get feedback stating to cite your research sources, you know that you probably didn't include at least all of your oral citations, and you would find information about citing your sources in your textbook on pages 126 through 127. So oral citations are essential. So make sure that you look at the suggestions, because those are the things that commonly students that are at this level need to work on. Now, once you do that, look over here to the left side of the page. If you look at the introduction, be sure that you fully develop your introduction and you put a lot of effort into your introduction. How you begin and how you end a speech matters. Place special emphasis on your attention getter. Either tell a story or begin with a startling fact or startling statistic. Do not begin with, "Hi, my name is." Do not state that at all in your speech. You do not need to state that, nor should you state that in your speech. The very first thing you want to do is grab their attention. So make sure you refer to lecture and also your textbook as to how to best grab your audience's attention. State your thesis. It needs to be persuasive. You are submitting your topic approval form for your persuasive speech. So make sure that it's persuasive. And if it isn't, I'll make a comment in that form. So the thesis needs to propose X or Y. It needs to make a proposal. You are stating that there is a problem or there is a crisis that must be addressed, and that needs to be communicated very clearly in your thesis statement. You want your audience to agree with you. Remember, the thesis needs to be stated in one single sentence. Audience motivation and relevance. Answer the question, why should they care? Why should they take their 5 to 6 minutes to sit there in an audience and listen to you? Establish that for them. Try to draw a connection so that they would want to listen to you. Establishing credibility. How do you know what you claim to know? Do you have personal experience? You have to do your research. Make sure that you include that and try to do it in a creative way. And then the final part of the introduction is to preview. Preview each specific main point. Today I will discuss 1, 2, and 3, and you can state it in a more creative manner than that. But what is most important is that you state a clear preview. In the body of your speech, you want to make sure that you select an organizational pattern so that you go to chapter 16 and also my video lecture in chapter 16, and you choose a pattern that is best for the goal of your speech for a persuasive speech. So you might choose problem solution. You might choose problem cause solution. You could still choose topical. You could choose Monroe's motivated sequence or refutational, but know what organizational pattern you are selecting. Use it and make sure that it fits the goal of your speech. Transitions right here, you need to make sure that you include clear and smooth transitions. A transition from the introduction to the body, between main ideas, and from the body to the conclusion. And it could be as simple as first, second, third, or now that I discussed X, I will discuss Y. Next, here in the body, we have quality of research and verbal support. You want to make sure that you're using quality research, that you vet your research, that you meet the research requirements of the assignment, that you cite your sources, and also the quality of your verbal support, such as your explanation and your description and your use of examples and the stories that you tell. So you want to make sure they're all of quality. Use of rhetorical proofs. I provided you all with a handout of the rhetorical proofs. According to Aristotle, to make a strong classical argument, a speech needs to incorporate ethos, and that is your credibility with your audience. Do you have a sense of character? Do you have a sense of trustworthiness? And it's not what you think, it's what your audience thinks. Logos, your logical appeals. So you're going to make an argument and then you're going to back it up. You're backing it up with evidence to support that argument. That's your logos. And then just a tad of pathos is what you need. You want to make sure that the bulk of your argument isn't pathos, because then you run the risk of getting into too many fallacies. But Aristotle said you do need a tad of pathos. So you want to be thinking about, what emotion do I want my audience to feel, and how can I best get them to feel that emotion? So whether you do it through a visual aid, whether you do it through personal testimony or a story, you want your audience to feel a certain emotion. So you might bring them into a state of discomfort or cognitive dissonance and maybe a sense of indignation. And then with your argument, you're going to provide them with a lifeline to bring them to a state of consonance so that they feel a state of comfort, so that they feel that if I take this action, I will feel good about myself. So bringing them into a state, a different emotional state. So that's the use of pathos. And moving on here to use of inductive, and it really is and or deductive reasoning. So you want to make sure that, yes, this does go in line with logos, but you are making an argument. And within that greater argument, you're going to have these mini arguments. So you will either use, or both, inductive reasoning. So that's when you're making an argument from specific to a more general argument. Or you're making a deductive argument, and that's more general to specific. So make sure again that you go back to chapter 16 and my video lecture in chapter 16 that talks about inductive and deductive reasoning, because that's going to be the heart of your persuasive speech. Adapted your speech to your audience. Make sure that throughout your speech you adapt your message to your audience. Again, you're pretty much establishing why they should care. How is this relevant to their lives? What is the connection? So if you're talking about local sex trafficking, talk about how sex trafficking is impacting families in their area so that you can adapt that message specifically, and what's being done to combat local sex trafficking in your audience's particular area. So that's adapting your speech to the audience so that they have a horse in the race, so that they actually care about what you're talking about. And then moving on to the conclusion, you must signal the ending. So that's just like a transition. Review each specific main point. So today we covered 1, 2, 3. Again, it's that specific. Restate your thesis. It doesn't have to be exact, but you must restate the thesis to drive the point home, the claim that you're making, the persuasive thesis statement that you are making. And then finally, end in a memorable way. Go to your textbook to look at different ways to conclude your speech. It's not just that's it, or I'm done, or thank you, here are my references. Don't do any of that. Make sure that you end in a memorable way. So if you begin your speech with a story, you might not finish that story, but you might end with that story. Leave your audience with something to remember. The reason why we have this built-in redundancy is so that your audience can, number 1, comprehend, and can, number 2, remember what you said. And then finally, with delivery, this is worth more than it ever has been thus far in the semester, and that's in part because you have had ample opportunity to practice your delivery skills, and delivery does matter. It is not everything, but it is something. So remember that. Your delivery is to be extemporaneous, no reading your speech to the audience. You are speaking as if you're having an individual conversation with your audience. Eye contact needs to be of quality and consistency. Think of it like this. Your eye contact needs to be direct with your audience, Frequent and encompassing. Don't go looking over their heads or down at the floor. Make that direct eye contact with them. The general rule of thumb is no more than 1 to 3 seconds, because if you look at someone for longer than 3 seconds, they start to get uncomfortable. Gestures. Your gestures need to enhance, accent, regulate, emphasize the verbal message. So use your hands to gesture. If it is not comfortable for you, practice, 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 so that your gestures start to sync up with that verbal message. Confidence. So part of how we communicate our confidence is in our body posture. So make sure that you have a solid stance. Make sure that your shoulders are back and that you speak from a place of knowing and you speak from a place of understanding. Movement. You want to make sure that when you move, it's with purpose, so that it's constructive and it's not distracting. Your use of language. So the words that you use matter. So making sure that your word choice is appropriate for your audience. Your voice. You want to make sure that your voice is well projected, that you modulate your voice so that the tone and the pitch communicates enthusiasm, but is also appropriate for the topic that you are discussing. Your speech articulation and pronunciation, making sure that you slow down so that you're fully articulating your speech sounds and that you're pronouncing your words properly. And then finally, doing your best to keep your speech free from self-adapters and disfluencies, also referred to as verbal surrogates. So the self-adapters are the things that we do to self-soothe. You want to make sure that you are conscious of this. So some of you have a tendency to rock side to side, and that's typically unconscious. You want to make sure that you're conscious of that tendency and that you stop yourself so that when you do move, you move with purpose. The other thing is touching your neck, and that's a nonverbal indicator that you feel vulnerable. So if you notice that you're going to touch your neck, then just remove your hand. Remember to use your hands to gesture. And then finally, the verbal surrogates, the disfluencies, the ums, the likes, the buts, the basicaly's, you know what I'm saying. If you have a tendency to use them significantly, then you want to make sure that in just regular life, get a rubber band and snap it every time you say it so that you become more comfortable not verbalizing the pauses, the silent pauses. Get comfortable with pausing. A silent pause has a great effect or impact on an audience, has the potential anyway to do that. You don't need to fill the silence with your verbalization. Do your best to pause and then carry on. If you say or a few times, it's not the end of the world, but do your best to pause and then carry on. If you have to, make a note on your note card. Stop saying like, stop saying I hope that you find this helpful, and if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to contact me. Know that when I am filling out your evaluation form, it will be in Canvas in a rubric, but it will follow this exact format.